Hi guys, welcome everyone. My name is Vera and today I'm going to show you how to paint this wonderful painting right here. Now before we start, let's go through all our supplies to make sure we have everything that we need for today. First thing you're going to need is of course a canvas. You're welcome to use absolutely any size canvas, but I will be using 12 by 16 inch canvas. But again, you can use any size, it doesn't have to be that particular size. Next thing we're going to need is paint. I will be using primary colors only, student grade acrylic paint. So primary colors are red, yellow, blue, plus black and white. In regard to which yellow, which red, and which blue, doesn't really matter for this particular painting. As long as you have primaries in acrylic paint, this will work just fine. If you guys are not into mixing colors, you're welcome to use pre-mixed colors as well, like such as, for example, having pre-mixed green would be a great asset. That way you don't have to mix everything from scratch. You can take greens and just modify them based on which shade of green you need. The same as having pre-mixed purple. Purple could be tricky to mix, so if you have that one pre-mixed, that would be nice and helpful as well. Yeah, and whatever else color you'd like to have premix, like for example brown, you may be able to use a little bit premix here. But if you just have primaries, that's more than enough because I'm going to show you how to mix them as well. And of course, we're going to need water, paper towel, or usable fabric cloth, whatever you got there. And of course, brushes. Oh, I got one of my brushes in paint already. As far as brushes, I'm going to be using a pretty standard set of 3 different brushes. I'm going to be using something on a bigger side. In my case, it's, I'll say, about medium or large square brush. Yours doesn't have to be square as long as it's something on a bigger side, so we can color in large areas with it. Then I'm going to have something on a smaller side, so something medium small. This is number 5 for those who are wondering about numbers. If you have your brushes numbered, this is number 5. I don't usually recommend going by numbers because sometimes different brands, you would compare the same number and they would look very, very different. But if you do have a large set of number of brushes, this is just something to go by. And I would say this is a medium, small, square brush as well. It doesn't have to be square. Square is just my personal preference. And of course, we're going to need a small detailed brush. So this one is number 0 pointy brush. So that's what I'm going to be using today. And that's pretty much it. All right, so how are we going to do this? Let me explain it to you before we start. We're going to start working in layers. We're going to work from what's furthest to what's closest. So we're going to start with our sky. We're going to use some purple, some blue, some white. Then we're going to move to our first set of mountains, the ones that are in the distance. And again, we're going to use some purple and some blue. Then we're going to move to the next set of mountains / hills that are in the distance, and we're going to use some cold greens. And then we're going to move to the mountains that are closer. So to this wonderful fields and hills with flowers, and we're going to do them in layers. So we're going to put first layer on all that, first layer on our little path in between, and then we're going to be going over all of this many, many more times to add additional layers and additional colors. And then pretty much almost last, we're going to add those little trees in the background, the little bush in the background, and the little tree coming from the side here. And of course, flowers and a tiny bit of grass here. And that's pretty much it. All right, so we can start. Let me put this one away. And I'm going to grab my canvas here. So since we're starting with the background, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my large brush, my biggest brush. I'm going to dip it in the water. And I'm going to start with some white. So I'm going to fill my brush quite generously with white. And I'm going to only work, I would say, about 1/3 from the top. So that's the only section I care about right now. So I'm going to start adding brush strokes right here. You technically could color the entire 1/3 from the top. That wouldn't be a mistake. But if you just color the right side of it, bottom right, that would be enough as well. And you see I'm dipping my brush in the water and I'm dipping it in white. And the reason why, I want it to stay wet. So do you see? I'm coloring it in quite generously with white. I don't have a dry brush some white on. I want it to stay wet for a little bit for me to blend other colors in. So that's why, as you can see, it's quite generously applied. Now once we have that, I'm going to move to my light blue. So I'm going to wash my brush. Then I'm going to scoop some white on the side. Let's make this lower. And then I'm going to add just a tiny touch of blue. Make nice light blue. Right, and with this blue, I'm going to add just a couple of brush strokes horizontally. So these are just a couple of brush strokes and blend them in. You can go darker if you wanted to. I like the light version of it. But again, if you go a little darker, that would not be a mistake either. And now before all of that dries, we're going to move to our purple because we kind of want to blend all of that on wet. So for my purple, how I'm going to mix it is, again, I'm going to start with white because I'm mixing light purple. So I'm going to scoop some white on the side. Then to that white, I'm going to add just a little bit of blue. And so to make about medium light blue. And then to that color, I'm going to add just a little bit of red. Now, it's important what red you use when you're mixing your purple. Red, it's more like a fire truck red that has a bit of yellow undertone to it. It's unfortunately not going to give you a good purple ever. So for mixing purple, you always want to use red that has more of a pinker undertone. You see, magenta undertone. That's what you want to have for mixing your purple, because otherwise you're just not going to get a vibrant purple. You may get a grayer or almost like a brownish color if your red has yellow premixed into it. So just make sure you're using more like a magenta or dark pink or just like primary red that has more of a pinker undertone, so it doesn't have premixed yellow. Or you can use always pre-mixed purple as well for this. Again, I prefer mixing all my colors because then I don't have to keep 100 million tubes of different colors at home, because I can always make it. So that's my preference, but if you prefer pre-mix, that's okay. And I'm going to go on top with this. So if this is still super wet, then you should be able to spread it no problem, and blend it straight into your whites that we laid earlier and into your light blue. However, if your paint started drying up already, you're going to have a bit of a hard time, but I'm going to show you how to deal with it if your paint is drying up. So I'm going to add a couple of brush strokes here too. As I was chatting with you guys, some of my paint did dry up, and you see some of them don't blend properly. So to blend them properly, again, right away before they fully dry, because then if the paint is fully cured, you can't do anything about it, I'm going to wash off my brush. I'll dab it off on a paper towel so it doesn't have too much water. And then with a brush that's clean and slightly wet, I'm going to go right over. And what that does, that moisture from the brush is going to start spreading that fresh paint. That may not be wet enough to spread by itself, but with addition of this moisture from the brush, it definitely is wet enough to spread. So just blend it with that slightly wet brush and a bit of water on your brush. And you see, it creates a really beautiful blending. And if at any point you feel like, oh no, I have a harsh line, what you could do, you can always grab a little bit more white and just fix it up with white. That's an option too. Not preferable option, but it's an option. And here is our sky. Now guys, I want to mention something for those who may want to have the edges done. If let's say plan to hang your painting in the end and you feel like you like the look of edges being looking like you wrapped your image around the edge of your canvas, it's best to do the edges as you go, because that way you don't have to mix your colors again. So you can take the same purple, you can go right on top and color in the edge, and wherever the purple meets the sides, and do that with every single color that we're going to be using today. So as we go, if anything that you paint goes to the edge, bring it right over the edge. Yes, it will take additional time, but if you're not in rush, if you're doing this comfortably at your comfortable pace, you don't have a deadline for finishing this painting, that's a good way to do it, because then in the end it does look very polished and complete. I personally, it's not my favorite thing to do. I find it slightly annoying to have to do it. I usually like doing my edges in the end, and I don't mind mixing the paint. So if it comes to that, I will just mix every single color again. I don't mind that, but I know that a lot of people don't love mixing as much as I do. So if that's you, you might want to do the edges right away as you go. Or you can always leave them empty and we can color them with black or with like some other color later once we're done. Just one color to make it look almost framed. So again, not a big deal, just wanted to mention this up front. All right, now we're gonna move to our mountains. And we're gonna do them in two colors again, purple and blue. So to this purple that I have, I'm gonna make it slightly bluer for my mountains. I'm actually gonna take a piece of it on the side, just a little bit, and I'm gonna take a smidge of blue. Maybe that was too much. Let's take a bit more purple. And a little bit more white. So now it's like a bluey purple. So it's still purple, but it has a bluer undertone, which is what I wanted for my mountains. And somewhere where this section ends, or a little bit before that, I'm gonna add two mountains. They can be any shape that you want them to be. There's no particular shape that they have to be. This is one start, right? And I'll just add a couple more brush strokes here. And then right away, what I'm gonna do, I'm gonna wash this brush, dab it off on a paper towel, take white, and blend white from the bottom into this mountain. And you see, it creates, we're not looking for a smooth transition. If it's brush strokey, that's not a bad thing. Let it be. We just want it to somewhat merge into white on the bottom. Beautiful. And now I'm going to add a second one. So very similarly to how we did this one. I'm going to start by taking a bit more of that purple. And I'm just going to add second mountain to my here. And of course the same thing, I'm going to take some white, start from the bottom, and then bring it into this mountain. You can make a bit more whiter transition between them or not, doesn't matter at all. And then right away before they dry, I'm going to add just a regular light blue. So I still have a bit here, but I'll make a bit more. I would say it should be medium to light, like a medium light blue. I'll take a little bit, and while it's still wet, I'll just blend it in a touch. If it's not wet, if it's already dried, you can still blend it in. You're just going to need to blend it with a wet brush like I showed you on the sky, so pretty much like that. Okay, so let's wash up my brush. We'll just help it a little bit with a clean wet brush. Awesome. So that's our first mountains. Do you see they look foggy, they look in the distance, and that's exactly what we want. That's why we started putting the color up top, so it keeps that harshest, darkest line. It's not harsh, it's not dark, it's still very pastel colors, very foggy in a way, but it is the harshest out of all of them. And then since we blended some white, it looks like it's almost disappearing towards the bottom, which is exactly what we're looking for. On next one, we're going to move to our other mountains. We're going to move to our green ones. So we're going to need to mix our green. So let's do that. Let me put my mixing palette here so we can see it better. I'm going to mix on the same spot. Why not? Because we're going to start with light blue anyway. So just take some white, take some blue, mix it up. I would say make medium light blue-ish. And then to that, you can start adding yellow little by little. So let's add a little bit of yellow. You see it turned into like a teal color, which is great, but I want it a little bit greener, so I'm going to take a bit more yellow and add it in, and it's going to little by little be turning into, might even need it more blue, like a beautiful emerald color. That's what we're looking for, but light emerald. We're not looking for like a super dark emerald. And don't add a whole bunch of yellow right away. Don't let's say take equal parts of blue and yellow, or like a blob of yellow, because it's going to bring it to a super, super vibrant green, and you're not going to be able to change it. It's easier to mix literally a new color than the color that has too much yellow. So that's why always add little by little until you feel like you arrived at the right color, and then you can stop. So for me, I think that's the right color. It looks pretty emerald to me. So I'm going to try it, and then if I don't like it, I'll adjust it. And I'm going to add, I've got 3 hills here. 1, 2, 3. They don't have to be the same or even, and we're not trying to make like an evenly spaced 3 hills. Uneven is better. So 1 is going to start pretty high up. And I'll bring it somewhere here maybe. And then we'll add a small one here. Yeah, that's great. Love it. Okay, and the color is actually really good. So I'm going to continue. I'm going to take a bit more of this color and continue adding and almost coloring it in, going down in a brushstroke that follow the same motion. So you see I colored a bit in, but now I kind of want to add a bit more of a darker color. So to the same color, again, it's best to do it while it's wet, so don't take any breaks just yet. I'm going to add a smidge more blue, and I'm actually going to add a smidge of black. So just a little bit. Black is a very bossy color. If you add too much, it's going to overtake it, and we don't want that. So just add a little bit, and you see it just got a shade darker. A few shades darker, a little dimmer too, and a grayer, and that's okay. And again, you see I'm blending it. Let's make a little more. I'm running out of paint here. So you see we got mountains that have a bit of that movement, a bit of that brush strokiness. Notice I'm not trying to get rid of it. I'm not trying to blend it in so you don't see it. I love it actually. And that our mountains are a little lighter on top and then are a little bit darker on the bottom. Alrighty, you guys are doing a great job if you're through with this. And now we're going to move to our path here and our green hills on the sides. And again, this is best to do right away too before this back dries. If it dries, no big deal. Totally fine. But if you can do it right away, that would be beneficial. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to mix my light green now to use as a base for our hills and mountains. So I'm going to use the same brush for this. So I'm just a little higher. And I'm going to start with yellow this time. So I'm going to go quite heavy on yellow. And I'm going to add just a smidge of blue, not too much, because I don't want it to turn too dark. And then to that, I'm going to add a lot of white as well. And for this, it's best to use, again, it doesn't really matter which blue you use. However, it's preferable if you use primary or phthalo blue. So the blue that I would probably recommend avoiding here in this particular step in mixing greens, actually any shades of green, including this green that we just used or this green, I would probably recommend avoiding ultramarine blue. Just because this may still look okay with ultramarine blue. This one will look a little dim. It's not going to have that beautiful lime-like or like green apple vibrancy. So if you want your paint a bit more vibrant, use phthalo or primary blue. And I'm going to start by mapping it out and just mapping out where my mountain is going to start and where my path is going to be. So I would say my path is going to be from somewhere here. You see it curves a little bit to the left, and then it goes all the way to the edge of the canvas, a little bit higher than that. So like that. And that's one side. And then let's add second side. So on the second side, we'll start around somewhere the same. We'll go to the left and a little lower. And from there, I'm going to bring it somewhere here. Now here, I'm going to bring it up just in like a wavy line, not straight line, until I would say somewhere around here. And then I would color it in right away. And that's why I was saying it's best if you can do this before your paint dries, because before your paint dries, if you do this right away, that blue underneath will still blend into this. So you're not going to see that harsh line of previous mountains underneath. So in that way, it's best to do it right away. If you don't do it right away, that's okay. Totally fine. Again, it's not a deal breaker in any way. It doesn't really matter how you color those as long as they're colored. And then I'll do the same thing on the other side. So from the top here, I'm going to bring it, I would say, until the top of this hill. All right, so that's our backdrop for our green fields. Now, before they dry, I actually want to add a couple more colors. I want to add darker green and I want to add light yellow. And then I'll let them dry and then I'll do more layers later. So I'm going to start with my darker green. On the same spot, I'm just going to take a bit more yellow and definitely a bit more blue. So no other colors, just yellow and blue. And of course, there was some white already mixed into it, so there is some white generally in this. And you can use either the same brush or you can go a little bit smaller this time. And I'm going to add a couple spots. So right here, I'm going to blend it in. So again, you don't want to use too much paint on your brush because you want to almost dry brush it on while it's wet. Ideally while it's wet. It's going to work if it's not wet too. And then from here down, I'm going to add a little bit of this green. Again, if it's wet, you actually can get away with a bit more paint on your brush because it's going to blend as you bring it down. If your brush is already dry, you may need to use a little bit less paint on your brush, so you're almost dry brushing it on. So it goes on nice and transparent. In this corner, just generally going to add a bit more green in this corner. And then from here up, I'm going to add some as well. And the same thing, if your paint is still pretty wet, you can get away with a little bit more paint on your brush because then it just blends. You don't have to worry about it. If your paint is a little bit on the drier side, I would say just try to dry brush it on. And then just this corner in general. And you see, I'm starting where I need it darkest, so here. So when I have my brush filled fresh with paint, I'm going right here where I'm going to need it most. And then as my brush is running out of paint, I'm continuously spreading it up. So as I go, it's becoming less and less paint on my brush, so it just creates a nice transition. And another color that I want to add pretty much right away is going to be light yellow. And you can use the same brush or you can switch to a smaller brush at this point. And I'm going to take a little bit of white here. I'm going to take a little bit of yellow. I'll mix them up. I'll make fairly light yellow. And then with this color, I'm going to go, again, ideally if it's still wet, awesome. You can use quite a bit of paint on your brush because it will blend. If this is already dry, just dry brush it on with a minimal amount of paint. So I'm just going to go and highlight all those lighter areas. This may even be too much paint. Yeah, okay, this is better. And we will add the highlights there later too. This is just, certain things are good to add right away. It's one of those things that's good to add right away. All right, so do you see it looks so much better than just one flat color, right? Okay, and another thing I want to add, and we're going to take a break soon, but before that, I want to add the base for our path. So let's just start with something, and then we'll take a break and then we'll work on it a bit more. So we're going to do like light yellows here, and then we're going to do almost like light browns around it. So we could always start with light yellow. I'm going to scoop some white on the side again, add a bit more yellow, and just right here, I'm going to fill in a section with light yellows. And then to that, maybe a little longer actually. And then to that, I'm going to add a bit of red to make it like a peachy color, do you see? And with this color, I will also add a couple of brush strokes. I would probably recommend using a smaller brush than what I'm using now. And then to the same mixture of white, red, and yellow that looks almost like peachy, I'm going to add a smidge, tiny little smidge of black. So it's going to bring it down, it's going to make it a little dimmer for me. And with this color, I'm going to go closer to the edges of my path. And to make a little more, I'm running out here. This is just a couple of brush strokes. Again, don't use too much paint regardless whether it's wet or dry. You want to use a minimal amount of paint. And again, we're not aiming for a perfect blending. This is not this type of painting. And that's just my first layer. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to let all of this dry, because now after this it's going to be all about layering and layering and layering. But for my layers to stick, this actually has to be dry. So I'm going to take a little break. I'm going to finish this segment of the video. I'm going to take maybe 10, maybe 15-minute break. My paint dries pretty fast, so that should be plenty of time. And then I'll come back and I'll show you guys what to do next. And I'll recommend you do the same. Take a break, and whenever you're ready for the next chunk, and whenever your paint is fully dry, come back and we'll finish it up. And I will see you guys in the next segment. Oh, and by the way, just to mention this right away, don't leave your brushes with paint on, because that will ruin them. Make sure you wash them really well, dry them, put them aside nice and clean. That way they will serve you much longer. All right, guys, I will see you in the next segment.